Welcome to our monthly series featuring our Engineers and Architects of Hawaii meetings. Meetings are held in room 301 at Topa Tower, downtown, on Fridays at noon. We encourage you to attend these meetings live or via Zoom so you can personally meet the speakers and members. Check out eahawaii.org for upcoming meetings and links to our archive of past meeting videos. My name is Philip Blackman, a past president. We've had numerous programs by nationally known fire protection engineer Sam Dannaway. At this meeting, Sam previews the book he is authoring on the history of the founding of the Honolulu Fire Department in 1851. One highlight is how Hawaii's monarchy and privy council played critical roles in the founding and department operations, and even 4-year-old Prince Albert's role, who was made an honorary member of the fire department.
A study of the history of the Honolulu Fire Department is a study of the culture, society, politics, and changes of the time of Honolulu itself. A fire department doesn't grow in a vacuum. It develops in response to the changes in the society, culture, and especially the politics that surround it. It can best be stated by the theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking's quote, "It is the past that tells us who we are. Without it, we lose our identity."
Sam is joined with Paul Fox. Paul and Sam are working together on a book on the history of the Honolulu Fire Department. He gave us a presentation, and you can watch it on YouTube, on the second Chinatown fire. But today he's going to concentrate on the Honolulu Fire Department itself. All right, let's get started then, Sam.
My name's Sam Dannaway. I'm with Kaufman Engineers, and I'm the head of the Speakers Bureau for the month of March, and I've picked myself to do this presentation. I'm going to talk about a project that I'm collaborating on. We're writing a book on the history of the Honolulu Fire Department. You see there, we have basically our three authors, myself, Paul Fox, whose primary role is media photographs. He has an extensive collection of old photographs of the fire department, well, old and modern fire, and a lot of knowledge of the fire service. And we also have Dennis Lewis, who is a retired fire captain from the Honolulu Fire Department. And Dennis is an avid fire department historian, and while he was in the fire department, he was the curator of the fire department museum, and he's the one that basically got that thing established and finally open. We're also doing this project. We have the blessing of the Honolulu Fire Department. They're supporting us in any way they can. They have assigned us with a staff liaison, Candace Akiona from Community Relations. So she's our go-between to try to find out any, basically looking for information that they might have, resources, stuff of historical nature. For example, we were able to go out to the vehicle maintenance facility out in Waipahu, and we were able to see a couple of very old rigs in pretty bad shape that might be available for restoration someday. So we collected a lot of good information. So anyway, so that's the way the team goes. And in a way, we're all authors. I know Paul has also contributed to the writing, and Paul has contributed immensely to this presentation today, and I'm very grateful for that too. So what I'm going to talk about, well, the project's been going on for about 18 months. I like to say we're about halfway through. We have about 250 pages of manuscript. And we didn't think it was going to be this big, but it might be a 500 or 600 page book. And we might end up making 2 volumes, because our goal is to try to get something published by the end of the year. And we're not quite sure how far along we're going to be at that time. So in this presentation, I'm just going to pick out some interesting things about the history. I'm not going to go through the entire history of the department, but just some things that we found along the way, part of our research. Talk about the first fire company and the establishment of the Honolulu Fire Department. A lot of our research outside of the fire department records is, of course, with the newspapers. One of the first newspapers published in the islands was the Polynesian. In 1950, there was a notice in the newspaper that the Ministry of the Interior, the government, purchased the fire engine. We'll talk about that engine a little later. Put out this notice, now that we have an engine, we're going to put out a call for volunteers. And once we get enough volunteers, we'll establish a fire company for Honolulu. And of course, what was driving this in the 1850s, Honolulu was becoming, the downtown was growing. It was a bustling seaport. They were starting to have some fires. Before, 20 years before, everything was pretty much thatched buildings, and wasn't much need for a fire department because when thatched hut buildings, it just went and it was gone. They pulled it down, but with the introduction of wood, combustible construction, the need for the problems that the ships actually had. There was a lot of fires on board ships that were in port. There was a demand for developing some way to fight fires in Honolulu. So it was going to be organized as a volunteer department. Okay. If you notice, this was January 1850. So things were we're not really sure what happened in between, but during the next 11 months, they still felt the need to establish some kind of firefighting capability. The Privy Council, which was basically the king's advisors, all the key cabinet ministries and all the governors of the islands were part of this Privy Council that gave, at the time, Kamehameha III advice. And so they basically resolved to establish a committee, just like they do today. Let's find out what we need. The original purpose of the committee was to try to fix things up so they could have better police protection. Because along with the issues with fire, there's a lot of, basically rowdy sailors, some crime, and so they needed to get on top of that. But part of the committee's work was they actually stepped into the area of the fire department and had a resolution to, again, let's start getting this fire company going. Okay? So it's hard to see this, but these are some meeting minutes from the Privy Council where they, as a result of that committee report, they said, okay, we're going to have somebody create an act that will organize a fire department for Honolulu. And so that happened in November 11th, 1850. And here's the act that was developed. This is just the first section of the act. And in section 1, it indicates that fire department shall have a chief engineer, 4 fire wardens, and as many firemen that the chief engineer needs to get his department going. This act was approved in December 27th, 1850. That's one of the dates you often see as the origination of the Honolulu Fire Department. You might also see December 30th, 1850, because that's the date that Kamehameha III actually signed the act. And you might also see May 8th, 1851, because the legislature, their job was to confirm all the acts of the Privy Council, and that was done in 1851. And you can see this is the 2001 logo from the Honolulu Fire Department. So their view is the fire department was established in 1851. There's actually a 4th date, which is the date that it first appeared in a newspaper, which was January 11th, 1850. The act authorized the governor of Oahu to appoint a chief engineer. That's the word used synonymously with fire chief. And the governor of Oahu, I'm going to try to pronounce that name, appointed, this is where he appointed Alexander J. Cartwright. This is the original letter. This is a copy of the letter that's on file at the archives, appointing him on February 3rd, 1851, as the first chief engineer. Remember, he's chief engineer of the Honolulu Fire Department. Was he the first chief engineer? Technically, no, he wasn't. William Cooper Park, who was appointed to be the Marshal of the Islands in June 1850, as part of this police, to establish a police force to kind of keep things under control. He was assigned by the Ministry of the Interior to also get a fire department going. And so in October of 1850, he was actually given an appointment as chief engineer. But it wasn't called the Honolulu Fire Department at that time, or there was no official Honolulu Fire Department at that time. Basically, he was in charge of the fire company, which turned out, which was later referred to as Engine Company Number 1. And of course, then we have Alexander J. Cartwright, again, February in 1851. He became the chief engineer of the HFD. And so Cartwright is recognized as the first fire chief of the department. But, actually, if you go down to the training center, they have Park's photograph up there too. So they do recognize him as being instrumental in bringing things to a point where they could have the Honolulu Fire Department. And of course, Cartwright, he's the same gentleman that we recognize as being the father of modern baseball. Talk a little bit about the involvement of the Monarchy in the fire department. And one of the unique things about Hawaii that we had royalty for at least up until 1893, official royalty, and they definitely had something to do with the fire department. Like we mentioned before, Kamehameha III was involved in the establishment of the Honolulu Fire Department. Later on, Kamehameha IV and King Kalakaua, they were also involved in the fire department, and they were both volunteers. And we have articles in the newspaper about how they basically came to fires and helped with the volunteers to put the fires out. And then, there's the story of Kalakaua, of course, and the first Chinatown fire in 1886 came in and essentially took command of operations in one sector of the fire, and his efforts basically helped stop the fire from progressing towards Kaumakapili Church, and was able to save that church. So, pretty heroic efforts. Unfortunately, that church ended up getting burned, getting destroyed during the second Chinatown fire. So anyway, so that's the involvement. And also, Kamehameha IV had a son, Prince Albert. This is a picture of Prince Albert wearing a uniform of Hawaii Engine Company Number 4. Engine Company Number 4 was the Hawaiian company. It was all Native Hawaiians in that company. He became a honorary member, and unfortunately, he contracted a serious illness early in his childhood. He died at the age of 4. In fact, he had basically his funeral procession. They brought his coffin to the Royal Mausoleum using Hawaii Engine 4 to carry it. You can see his fire jacket and his fire horn, along with a portrait of him on display at the Queen Emma Summer Palace in their museum. This is one of the mysteries that we haven't quite figured out: is what was the first fire engine that was used in Honolulu? See there in early January 2nd, 1850, the Privy Council authorized $380. Basically, they told William Park that he could use that money to go purchase a fire engine. And it just so happens that he had heard that the brig, the ship Patapsco, had foundered off the coast of Oahu during a big storm, and everything in there was being claimed as salvage and going to auction, and there was a fire engine on board, and they were going to bid on that fire engine. I want to scroll forward here several months to give a little more background. In November, we have information about, this is the first time a fire engine appeared in the newspaper in Honolulu. And this newly organized fire company was there to help deal with the burning. I'm not sure how much they could accomplish, but they were 11 thatched houses basically were destroyed. But at this fire, Chief Engineer Park was hit by the brake of the fire engine. And I'll explain what a brake is in a moment, and needed attention. So we have at least some confirmation that there was a fire engine by November 1850. They probably bought this fire engine, but we have no record of it being used. And there could have been issues with getting enough volunteers to man the company or whatever. So there's some blank spots in that. So right now we know that there's a fire engine in place. We don't know which one it is. So we're trying to figure out what this fire engine was that was aboard the Papee'te. In Park's memoirs, it's called Reminiscence of Park, and they were written 30 years later, right after he retired in 1884, he recalls that the engine on board the Papee'te was from the Boston Fire Department, and it was Boston number 9. That they basically, the Boston Fire Department retired and put on a ship. And it may have just been put on a ship to be serviced on one of the ships, because several of the ships had these types of fire engines on them for their own firefighting. It was a Thayer manufactured hand tub built in 1794. By hand tub, they mean, it's basically a manually operated pump. The tub here is basically a container that has water that is able to enter into a port, so it can be pressurized with a piston. You pressurize the piston by, this is a brake here, and this one is a single brake, and it operates like a seesaw. So you have a person on either side of the truck, operating the piston, and you get a stream going on. It's a very small unit, not a lot of capacity. So that may have been, according to Park, if he remembered it correctly, and we're not sure he did, that may have been a unit similar to the Boston number 9. Or in Hunman's book on their fire apparatus, because Hunman was a big maker of these manually operated engines we call hand tubs. And they have a book, and they basically had all the serial numbers of everything, and they indicate that in 1849, a ship left Boston with the Excelsior number 3, a hand tub that was built in 1825, and it has these brakes here, which are 2 sets of brakes, so they can operate brakes from both sides of the engine and put several people on these brakes. Okay, so we either have this kind of baby fire engine, maybe 2 or 3 people would operate, or this little bit bigger model, a bunch of people could develop more pressure. So I'd like to show you how these hand tubs kind of work. So this is a demonstration of a fire muster, a more modern fire muster. Here's a hand tub here. This is a 2-brake operation. You can see a lot of big firemen there working that thing really hard, and you can see how Chief Park got his head busted. And they're basically in a competition, and the winner is the one that throws the water the furthest. I just found it interesting. This thing is like bouncing off the ground, and these are all like Harley Davidson motorcycle guys or something. So, okay. So what, did that brake that busted Park's head, was it from that little fire engine, Boston number 9, or was it for something like the Hunman, which is more or less like this type of unit?
Maybe quality built from that. It's a 18-something apparatus bouncing off the ground,
taking a lot of
still working. Over 150 years old.
Yeah. And there's a third possibility for this first fire engine that came from the merchants in Chinatown. a kind of a history of Chinatown called The Sojourners. I don't know the exact title. It indicates that in 1847 the merchants, organized themselves into a volunteer fire company and purchased their own unit. They describe a hand tub as a very small unit that was filled with by a bucket brigade, not by hoses from a hydrant. And so that one kind of fits the description of Boston number 9. But again, we're not sure. So they may have actually been the first ones to do something. And they would basically, Chinatown was starting to become a thriving business, and it was already a key social area for the immigrants, and its issues with fire. So that could have been the first one. I'm not sure, but every once in a while we come up with a little tidbit in our research, and so maybe eventually we'll get there and find out what the real truth is. This one was never part of Hawaii, but it's part of the myth. There's related to Hawaii. Hunman made this hand tub for a chief in Tahiti. It was named the Papee'te. But it never made it to Papee'te. When the ship came around the Horn, for some reason, it stopped in San Francisco, and we're talking about 1849. Well, no, this is 1855, about 1855 or so. The gold rush is still going on. The crew abandons the ship. All the stores on the ship never got delivered. San Francisco found out that they had this rig on the ship, and so they tried to incorporate it into their fire department. The Papee'te didn't work out in San Francisco because they couldn't move it up and down the hills of San Francisco, so it got shifted to a mining town in Columbia, north of San Francisco, and it became their first line hand tub fire engine. And this is the restored version that's now sitting in a museum in Columbia, California. Now the myth about it was, it might have something to do with the fact that it was supposed to go to Tahiti. And so the myth was that Tahiti, the chief decided he wasn't going to buy the fire truck. He didn't need it. And so Kamehameha stepped in and bought it. And that it was intended to come to Hawaii. And I read an article in the newspaper in 1934 about King Kamehameha's fire engine. And as far as we can tell, there was no truth to that rumor that this one should have ended up in Hawaii. And Paul spent a lot of time looking through check stubs from the Privy Council to see if they ever paid money for this thing in 1855. And it was interesting, and it also had some very interesting artwork on it. So at the time, but it's a beautiful fire truck that's been fully restored.
My theory on it is that back then Hawaii was known as the Sandwich Isles.
That's right.
And Tahiti was the Society Isles. And I think in the translation on the records, those terms got interchanged and everything. And I think that's where the mix-up has occurred.
We really wanted to believe this story, but we couldn't prove it. I wanted to believe it because we wanted to go to the museum and say, "Give Hawaii back its fire truck," but we couldn't prove it. Okay, so let's move from the age of the hand tubs to the steam fire engines, and just pictorially, a steam fire engine, and basically a boiler generates steam so it can drive a piston, which can basically act as a pump and push out, positive displacement type pump and push out a stream. And these had capacities much higher than the hand tubs. The hand tubs maybe 60 gallons per minute or 100 gallons per minute from that stream. These could do 400 to 700 or 800 ppm, depending on the class of the steam. Steam fire engines started to become popular in the mainland U.S. in the 1860s and on. Hawaii didn't get their first steam engine until 1879. And it's not so much that Hawaii was behind the times, because the steam fire engines required a substantial water supply, and Honolulu hadn't developed that type of water supply until we started getting into the latter part of the 1870s with the larger mains. And right at that time, all of Honolulu was basically fed by a reservoir up in Nuuanu. In the 1870s in Honolulu, they developed this area called the Esplanade, and it's about where 4th Street, Alakea, here's Queen, and Queen was basically like the harbor road at the time. And all this was basically harbor, which was filled in to create this Esplanade area, which is about where Aloha Tower is today. This Aloha Tower would be in this area right here, bottom of 4th Street. So they had government warehouses over here. They had a big fire. The hand tubs that they had couldn't do much with it, so there was a big complaint. It's about time we need to get a steam fire engine. And they had sheriff's folks coming through on a regular basis, touting the need for a steam fire engine. The other thing that was going in, the Chinese merchants in Chinatown said, hey, we're going to get ourselves a steam fire engine. And so they had set up to do that. Well, not wanting to be outdone, the government finally said, oh, we better get one too, because we don't want to seem like we're a bunch of bozos. The Chinese having this modern fire engine. So they got on board and basically piggybacked onto the order that the Chinese made, and went in at the same time, and the same day both those steam fire engines arrived in Honolulu. There's a story about the trials. Every time a fire apparatus comes in, it's got to go through trials to prove that it could perform as advertised. That its pumps will deliver so much water, so much pressure. It turns out the Chinese engine did quite well, but the Honolulu engine didn't. And I'm guessing it's because there were so many people fiddling with the Honolulu engine. But they eventually got it to work well. This is a picture of it. This is not from the time it was delivered. This is actually a picture that was taken in 1891. We'll see this picture again later on with the full building. It's called a Clapp Jones. I think it was a 400 GPM steam fire engine, and posing with it are they were called firemen.
Firemen, because a fireman is a person who stokes coal into a boiler.
And you see the HEC one on their breastplate thing, which Honolulu Engine Company never done. This gentleman here, his name is John White, guy with a beard. He was a fire marshal. He had a couple jobs, not so much. It wasn't so much like fire inspection and stuff, but it was more, in a way, being someone that kind of looked over all the equipment in the department. Now, in 1884, they got the first horse-drawn steam fire engine, or steamer, what we call them, a Muskeg. This steamer is shown in front of, anybody recognize this building? Still exists today. But it's not a fire station. Yeah, this is Palama Station, which is now is still there, and we'll talk about Palama Station a little later. But Palama Station was built in 1902. These steam engines lasted a long time. And of course, they got a new Clapp Jones in 1891, which was kind of the pride of their department at the time, and their first line piece of engine company #1, and it ended up getting severely damaged in the Chinatown conflagration of 1900. Initial reports were that it was damaged beyond repair, but they actually got it repaired and put back in service. Jumping into motorization, Honolulu started motorizing their department. They got their first two fire engines in 1911. Their first motorized apparatus was actually a chief's car got in 1910. Fire chief got it's called a Carter car. First fire trucks were Seagraves, and they bought two of them, and they were chemical engines, not the pumping apparatus that is common today. These basically are huge soda acid fire extinguishers. So basically mix the acid with the soda, generate what we call a loaded stream, a pressurized stream of foamy soda bicarbonate and vinegar, sulfuric acid, and drive it through the hose. And so these were very popular in suburban areas where there weren't easy access to water supplies. And so you could use it like a quick attack unit and maybe get the fire while it was small. Once the fire got big, these guys weren't much help at all. That's Engine Company 1, and they're in front of the central station. We'll talk a little bit about the central station. So that's 1911. Okay, the next set of fire trucks, they got 3 fire trucks, but actually 2 fire trucks and a trailer. They got this trailer here and rigged it up with one of their Muskie steamers, and so now it was no longer horse-drawn, it was tractor. Okay, so here's a picture on New Year's Day, 1913. So they got the 2 chemical engines that they purchased in 1911. Further down the line are 2 pumpers. These are pumping units like they have today. They got those in 1913. Actually, delivered in 1912. We're showing them off in 1913. You see the tractor all the way down here. And what they were doing here is they had a competition. All these units were stationed at their place. They rung the alarm and they timed the time it would take for them to get to the alarm box there at the Capitol grounds. And fire departments all over the country were doing that, showing how much better motorization was over horses, and those places where horses beat trucks and all that stuff. So that was one of the things. And so all the dignitaries were there, including the mayor and the board of supervisors, which is what we called the city council at that time. And what's notable in this picture is the mayor is not in this picture. And so Honolulu's first elected mayor was in 1909. It was Joseph Fern, and Joseph Fern was still the mayor. Had been reelected 1 or 2 times. He was the mayor in 1913. And when the mayor's office got established, that's when politics came into the fire department, or into government work in general. And the mayor and usually most of the board of supervisors were Democrats. Chief Thurston was a Republican, and the mayor spent his entire career trying to get rid of Thurston. And the mayor at the time had the right to appoint the fire chief, but it had to be confirmed by the board of supervisors. And even though the board of supervisors was almost always heavily Democratic, all the business leaders in town, they loved Chief Thurston partly because he was a Republican, and partly because the fire department was fairly effective and insurance rates were going down. And there's a lot of talk about insurance rates.
So was that him?
This is Chief Thurston right here. He served as fire chief from 1901 to 1928. So he was pretty much bulletproof politically because he was so popular, not just among businessmen, among people in general. So we have him here standing there. Then we have another picture on the same day of, there's Joseph Fern, Mayor Fern, standing on top of the tractor. So no fire chief to be seen. But there is a chief here. This is the future fire chief, the one that replaced Thurston in 1928. Thurston actually died in office. That's William Wallace Blaisdell. So he's basically the father of the Blaisdell family tree, which gave Honolulu another fire chief and a mayor, right? So, and the old Blaisdell Hotel and all that stuff. So, and Puno connections. That's all that goes on and on. Fancy in that white suit there. Okay, so it's hard to talk about steamers without talking about horses. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information that we've been able to find on horses. other than pictures showing them on the trucks and stuff. Started to get a little bit of information when they started to motorize, because seems to me people were getting a little nostalgic about the end of the horse era. And there were some articles, and actually we found out we got names of horses. And once they started motorization, we knew a lot of the names. And at one time, there was probably about 16 or so horses in the Honolulu Fire Department. By 1917, they were all gone as far as active service. Now this guy is Black Joe, and he served for 17 years in the fire department at Central, or sometimes we call it Station 1. And in 1917, they kind of kept him on as a pet. So they were able to keep, they took care of him. By 1920, they were told Black Joe's got to go, got to get rid of him. They couldn't farm him off to like the Parks Department or the Refuse Department to pull a wagon, because he was kind of infirm. He was apparently blind or half blind. And so they wrote about his sad story in the newspaper, and people started a fund to try to save Black Joe. And the point was that they could get enough money in this fund, they could put him out to pasture, someplace where he could just be taken care of. So that worked out really well for Black Joe. He ended up going to, I guess it was like a girls' reformatory or more like an orphanage. And he became, and it was basically in a kind of a rural setting. And so he had his green pastures. And, I don't know why this story always does this to me. It kind of chokes me up a little. It talks about these, because they were very dedicated animals, and they knew their job as follows. It says, last week, while half a dozen of them, being the girls, were conducting the old horse on one of these strolls, the school gong sounded. Black Joe lifted his head, listened intently for a brief second, and then broke away from his keepers and galloped to his stall. And when the girls ran in pursuit of him, they found him there, standing at attention, every muscle straining for the start. And Black Joe had answered the call of his youth when the gong meant service, sudden and swift and sure. So he basically was still acting like a fire horse, and it was pretty cool. I mean, and you hear stories about them, that the ones that are farmed out to pull milk wagons, and the alarm goes off, and all of a sudden off they go, So they were very unique animals, and I wish there was more information on them. We do have a chapter, at least half a chapter, and we try to talk about as much as we found about the horses in the book.
So the horses were trained that in the fire station, when the fire alarm, the gong went off, they would exit their stalls on their own and line up in front of the apparatus, and a harness would automatically drop down on top of them. So the firefighters just jumped on the rig and off they went.
Yeah, there's actually a big business in making these patented harnesses and they were set up electrically, so they would, when the gong went off, they could be dropped automatically. Talk a little about the early stations. This is Honolulu Engine Company #1. I'll try to move a little faster here. This photograph is from 1891, and you'll notice that the fire station is decorated in black bunting, and they're basically mourning King Kalakaua, who died in 1891, and so the stations were mourning him. This station was located at the Union Block. It was on King Street.
This was it?
No, not the Union.
Yeah, no, this was on King Street.
I have a picture of it. Yes, Union Block, but it's fronting King Street. This is that building you saw. Later on, they put on another bay, and this is a dispensary building that was built later on. So this was located here on King Street between Richard and Alatea. And when this station was built, they actually were planning to put horse-drawn steamers in there, so that main bay had a turntable in it. So they would basically run the horses in there, and then they could unhook the horses, take them out, and they would turn the table, turn the engine around so it would face the right direction. The station was put to the torch in 1900 as one of the sanitation fires to eliminate the bubonic plague. This wasn't during the conflagration. This is one of the fires coming up to the January 20 conflagration. They had to put that to the torch because they had plague in that area. This is the bell tower. The bell tower was located at, this is Union Street, and this is Hotel Street. And the bell tower wasn't the first station there. This is engine company number 2, the mechanics engine company. This is a ladder company. This company came in 1854. The ladder company came in 1857 when they moved the building from another site to that point. And then the bell tower was built in 1870. It's kind of a unique, it's a beautiful structure. It's too bad it didn't survive. When they built it, they built a clock tower on it. This is a hexagonal clock tower, and they put 6 clock faces on it, or places for 6 clocks. But the clocks were never put in. So
Ran out of money.
yeah, they ran out of money or something. I don't know. But this thing, ultimately, it fell into disrepair, and again, built in 1870. By 1897, it was just a termite trap, and then it was replaced by this station, which was called Central. It's at the same location as Central is today, basically on Baratania at the top of 4th Street. So this was 1897.
Made out of lava stone.
And then in 1934, they said it wasn't big enough because it was trying to serve as fire department headquarters, but they needed to replace it, so they replaced it with a brand new station in 1934, which is the one you see now. And this is on one of the historic register fire stations. We have 7 of them that are on the historic register in Honolulu. This is a Dickey building, the architect Charles Dickey, and I guess the unique feature is these are aluminum doors. Here's a picture of old Pacific Hose Company. They were on King Street. Where were they? King Street between Fort. Where were they? King Street between Alatea and Fort. Pacific Hose Company, number 3. And hard to see, but there's a hose cart in the back, horse-drawn hose cart. I don't know what the date of these was. This is a picture of the Hawaii Engine Company number 4. Where all the volunteers here were Hawaiian, and it was located on New Honor Street, just above Baratania. Now it was Kamakapili Church, and by the time in 1900, by the time this church had been destroyed in the fire, the station was no longer occupied. In fact, in 1893, during the Revolution or annexation, the volunteer department throughout the whole place, they were eliminated, became a paid department, and many of the natives got into the department, but sometime after a couple of years, there was a lot of hope that there was going to be this thing called the restoration of the monarchy, and apparently people were really serious that it was going to happen, and so I guess, I'm not sure what the date was, but 13, all Native Hawaiian firemen resigned from the Honolulu Fire Department by 1895 or 6, and with the expectation that the restoration was going to occur in pretty soon, and didn't happen. and they lost their jobs, and they were replaced immediately. So it didn't work out for those guys. And again, this one is an 1891 shot where it's decorated in that bunting.
When King was prince before he became monarch, he was an active firefighter and was secretary of that station.
He was a foreman at one time too.
Foreman also.
And a foreman is being the top fireman in the station. This is the old China engine house, and it originally held China Engine Company number 5. The Chinese had an engine company that was brought into the volunteer fire department of Honolulu. This is a picture of it during Kalakau's morning when it was still China 5. It was destroyed in the 1900 fire, but at that time, the China Engine Company had been relocated and there was a chemical engine in place in there. Actually, by the time 1900, they were disbanded because they actually were able to function as volunteers after the annexation for a few years, but ultimately they got disbanded. This is the first Makiki station. It was built in 1801, 1800. 1899. Same location, Wilder and Pequot. And this is the station today. This particular station, second one, was built in 1924, 1929. It's also on the historic register. This is the Palamas station. This was Station 4 for many years. I think it was no longer an active fire station after 1962, and basically that was when this is called Station 4. Kuakini Station opened up in 1962, so basically this kind of converted over to the Kuakini area. This is the first Kaimuki station, 1915. This is the modern station at the current location where Kaimuki is. Beautiful location there. Lee Station, also on the historic registry. Give me a couple minutes, I'll run through these Pearl Harbor slides. Honolulu was the only fire department ever to be actively engaged during wartime, attacked by the enemy. Engine companies 1, 4, and 6 responded to Pearl Harbor. They went to Hickam Airfield, and this has kind of been cleaned up a little bit, but this is kind of what they found when they arrived at the Hickam Fire Station. These Hickam fire guys, they never even got out of the station. As soon as they rolled out onto the ramp, they were strafed. One firefighter, I think, was killed. Fire chief was badly injured. A couple of people were injured. There's a picture of them actively. This is the Honolulu Fire Department actively applying water to one of the buildings there. This is building 1102, PACAF headquarters. At the time, it was a barracks building. This is a map. This is PACAF headquarters in 1102, position of the apparatus. And when the fire department, when they were setting up, the Japanese had made their first run. Right when they were setting up, the second run came, and at that time, 3 firefighters from the Honolulu Fire Department were killed. Actually, 6 others were injured, 3 were killed. Harry Pang, Tom Macy, and John Herrera, they're all 20-plus year experienced firefighters. The Japanese bombing destroyed the water systems, and the broken water mains were filling up bomb craters. And so they used the bomb craters as cisterns to basically draft water to use in the system of firefighting operations. So you see the damaged hangar there in the background. And what engine was that?
It's either 1 or 4.
Yeah. This just shows where bombs didn't just fall on Pearl Harbor and Hickam. They kind of fell all over the islands.
The majority of that was our own anti-aircraft shells falling back.
Some of it, yeah. I'm not sure I agree with that. But there was some big fires that were caused by anti-aircraft shells. These are the 3 markers for the 3 firefighters that died. The 6 firefighters that were wounded, they actually got Purple Hearts. But somebody forgot to put the 3 firefighters that were killed in for Purple Hearts. That was corrected in 1984 a group of firefighters, one of them being Dennis Lewis and his old fire captain from the new water station. They got together, and these guys were finally awarded their Purple Hearts in 1984. It was just an oversight. So that's it. We'll let you know when the book comes out.
Anybody on Zoom have a question? We'll let you go first.
Mary Ellen, Nordic Gay. So I was quite interested in their uniforms over the years, the impressive uniforms with the hats. What I was trying to understand is, did you find in your research different type of clothing that they wore for actually treating the fires or jumping into the fires if you compare with what firefighters wear today? Or did they just run in with the hoses with those uniforms on?
The very early firefighters, they basically had work clothes, and that's what they had.
That was it. Yes, sir.
I mean, they had their helmets, and gloves, but they didn't have the heavy, jackets, which today are Nomex and fire resistance and those types of things. So I'm not sure. It looks like things started to change more in the 20s and 30s when they started getting what we call turnout gear, which was the heavy jackets that were giving them a little more protection from fire.
Okay, thank you.
Great presentation.
Okay. Maybe we'll come back and when we finally announce the book and we'll do another one.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening today, watching today.
Just after 1 o'clock, I'm going to close out the meeting. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Engineers and architects of Hawaii welcome your comments on this program and any of our recent programs. We encourage your direct participation in this community outreach. So please email us your comments and ideas at eahawaii@gmail.com.